here's what I was trying to say, which kind of is in conflict with what I just said reading him. He says, they're discussing the fact that he plays around with words, he plays around with meanings, and then the person says, well, exactly, it does. Yeah, it makes it more fun for sure. And he then says immediately, but the poem is straightforward. That's what I was saying before I even started this video. He says now, the poem is straightforward. If you can figure out the clues there, there's nothing in that poem that would make you think that I'm trying to fool you. I have never discouraged anybody from looking any place or led them toward it, and I never will. There's no tomfoolery in that poem. It's straightforward. But what puzzles people, this is Fenn, but what puzzles people is that I've written 10 books, and in each one of my books I've made up words, and I corrupt words. For instance, in my Thrill of the Chase book, I talk about courting my wife. We all know that story. If everybody knows exactly what you're saying or what you mean, then who cares what the word is? And so that thought permeates, manifests itself in the poem. You know, I pride myself on being fairly intelligent. There are more intelligent people than me looking for this chest, though, I'm sure. Would you not agree he is saying two different things at the same exact time? He is saying that this concept that you screw around with words and meanings and it doesn't really matter, you might argue, then why do it? It doesn't really matter, though, if everybody understands what you're saying. And that practice, if you will, permeates, manifests itself in the poem. Then when someone says, in regard to that, exactly, it does, yeah, it makes it, you know, more fun for sure, he says, but the poem is straightforward. Now, I've cut out some of the interview between the two. And then suddenly he's back to the poem is straightforward. If you can figure out the clues there, there's nothing in that poem that would make you think that I'm trying to fool you. I have never discouraged anybody from looking any place or led them toward it, and I never will. I've never led them toward it, and I never will. There's no tomfoolery in that poem. It's straightforward. This has happened more and more and more as I have followed this poem and this chase. And I'll tell you something, it reminds me of something Fenn said in one or two interviews when he said, I think I've said too much. I think he has said too much. I think it's that simple. Fenn is not a god. Fenn is not is not a teacher who doesn't make mistakes. Fenn is a human being, and he says things that conflict with other things he says, and it kind of irritates me. Like I said again, this is not an anti-Fenn video. People sometimes will message me and say, you really stuck it to him. I'm not trying to stick it to him, believe me. But I am saying there are things he says that are just illogical. Well, they don't mesh. This is Fenn. My habit when writing something short is to decide on a subject, then start gathering sentences together with some kind of focus but not much direction. They need to stay close to the topic and carry my theme or plot to the end of the story. Often the thoughts come rushing out as I think along. One notion propagates the next. Sometimes I can't type fast enough. Then I retreat to the beginning and try to reorganize my words into some kind of acceptable, cohesive unit. How can I say a line better and keep it in the same flavor as the others? Is this sentence too predictable? Do I want to misspell a word to make the reader stop and look it up and maybe feel a need to respond? I use other techniques too, like corrupting a word or idea. I think that's a big deal. he corrupts not just words, but ideas. In my thrill book, Thrill of the Chase, I wrote about courting my wife. Oh, God, the same quote. He uses the word tenacity about, you know, tenacity means you keep trying, or you have a kind of a strength or bravery about it, gaining your goal. And he says, you know, people thought his wife was too good for him, but he was never short on tenacity. You know, he really chased his wife down and nabbed his woman. Okay, that's good. I never really thought that was such a terrible corruption when he used it. Tenacity was never one of my shortcomings, but he uses that example a lot. That sort of thing causes a kind of word of mouth publicity that I need because I self-publish and I don't have any distribution, and it's my way of keeping a reader's attention fresh. If one knows exactly what I mean, then who cares what the word is or how it's used? Educated editors disapprove of me en masse, but they don't have a Pulitzer either. Someone writes him an email, the definitions of words seems to interest you. What dictionary and year of dictionary do you use? He says, Fenn says, I don't use dictionaries anymore. I just type the word in Google for a faster response. It's fun to make up words and play with different spellings. When someone calls me out after noticing the corruption of a word I use, I just smile, especially when I say something that in my mind is correct, but in an academic sense, it's a horrible malfunction. For instance, emblazoned upon some of the bronze bells I've buried are the words imagination is more important than knowledge. That's Knowledge. If I had spelled that last word correctly, it would not have had the profundity of meaning I wanted. He left the D out. To misspell the word emphasized my point that having knowledge, Knowledge, DGE is, in fact, not as important as being resourceful. Also, when I make a mistake through ignorance, that ploy gives me a degree of deniability that I routinely need. It's kind of cute. So if you make an effort to go out and kind of play with words and stuff to get people's attention, then, of course, if you screw up and misspell something, you can always say, oh, I was just using that little ploy. I mean, yeah, it's kind of cute. I don't know. Do you get where I'm coming from with this? People are spending their TEM, time, effort, and money on this hunt. I have. I've been on 4 of them so far out in Colorado. My next one will be in Yellowstone. This entire video or series of videos is not going to be a put down of Fenn or a declaration of leaving the hunt. What it is saying you really have to watch how you read this. Going back to what I said previously, he does seem to come back and cover his tracks a bit and say the poem is straightforward. The poem, no shenanigans. The book, kind of shenanigans. You can read it. You can go back and read both the quotes or look them up. Just do a Terry Scant chase or a Google search. Some of the stuff I can't find in Terry Scant, but you can Google search those quotes and see what he actually said. He does say 2 things though about the same thing. He says the concept of messing with words and ideas permeates the poem, and then later he says, in no uncertain terms, which is what the concept that I started this video with today, was that the poem is almost sacrosanct. That is straightforward, clues, built by an architect, keep an eye on all the nouns, etc. I'm thinking he kind of screwed up because he had kind of been saying in general that the books he tends to play around a little bit with, not so much the poem. That's all I can do, because when he says 2 conflicting things, you have to come to conclusions, and you know, that's what makes this so... You know, that's what makes this so complicated. Buried in this thing, some people say 2008, 2009. I think he has said 2010. And we're going on 2000. Isn't it weird to think we're coming up on 2019? in a few months. That's weird. Still no one's found it. You know, you could argue that it's enough just to put this thing out there, write a poem about it, and write books about it straightforwardly. But when you've got a guy who is, by his own admission, changing words and corrupting meanings of ideas, that's the one that really scares me. But it's all based on the premise that you're going to catch it. It's almost like saying, it's almost like a teacher in your class who, you know, you're discussing, I don't know, you're discussing Napoleon, and he says, you know, he was, I don't even know if this is the right, I don't know why I picked Napoleon, but, you know, he just offhandedly says, and remember, he had to stay on the island of, Cuckoo Cachoo. I don't know. And someone goes, no, it was Elba, wasn't it? Oh, Elba, you're right. It wasn't Cuckoo Cachoo. I'm the walrus. It's Elba. Good for you. Well, I mean, that's kind of good that you're making your class stay awake. We're a huge class for Forrest Fenn. That's what I just realized. We're a huge class for Forrest Fenn. He is the teacher. I should say Forrest Fenn the teacher, question mark, but it's still, I like Trickster better. So here we are spending our TEM out there, boots on the ground, flying around, driving around. And for Forrest Fenn, it's a learning experience. He's teaching us. I've made statements that were just not true, just to see if anybody would catch it. One was about the First World War and for whom the bell tolls. It wasn't the First World War, it was the Spanish Revolution. For 3 or 4 years, nobody said a word about that. I said the Indians at Taos, Pueblo, practice idolatry like the Catholics. I thought that was a terrible thing to say, and I was ready to take it on the nose. Nobody ever said a word about it. And I said the first artist that painted Taos was Charles Craig, but it wasn't much of an artist. Nobody ever said a word. I mean, I was really disappointed that I got by with those things. Not everyone is going to tell you when you make a mistake. I know I wouldn't. Except at the end of this video. Let's not forget something else, too. Forrest Fenn, on top of being a teacher who teaches by messing up on purpose and seeing if you notice it, what a great thing to contemplate when you realize he's the guy that wrote all the stuff that's worth following to find this treasure chest. He's also very sarcastic, and he kids around with people and misleads them or fools them, or is I'll show you what I mean. When I first started doing this treasure hunt, there was a clue. I literally found a page that was like 15 official Forrest Fenn clues about the hunt. And one of the official clues in there was the treasure chest is more than 300 miles west of Toledo, Ohio. I just said to myself, well, that's a stupid clue because, I mean, of course it's more than 300 miles west of Toledo, Ohio. The Rocky Mountains are much further west than 300 miles of Toledo, Ohio. So if we know it's in the Rocky Mountains, we know it's, you know what I mean? It just occurred to me almost immediately. Later on, I came across this. He was with an interviewer, and the person said, as we drove back towards Santa Fe, I asked, how about another clue? He chuckled. Every day people call me begging for clues, blah, blah, blah. The person says, but just one clue? I pleaded, the interviewer says. He grins, okay, I'll tell you what I told a woman from Nevada who called and said she knew where the treasure was but was incapacitated, so would I please go get it for her? I said, well, you tell me where it is and I'll bring it to you. The woman wanted an additional clue. Kind of a little segue logic there. So I told her it's more than 300 miles southwest of Toledo. He's joking with her. Right? He's being sarcastic. That's obviously what he is telling this person as they're driving along. This woman was bugging him for a clue, and so he says, and he grins, he says, I told her it was more than 300 miles southwest of Toledo. I originally read west. So there's someone who's literally, admittedly being a bit obnoxious about the way that they're looking for it, but, you know, his response is to be sarcastic. Now, he didn't hurt her in any way because, as I said, she would know. I mean, if she had read any other stuff, she'd find that out anyway. So he wasn't misleading her so much as mocking her. But, it gives you a mindset about Forrest Fenn. And once again, I'm not trying to put Forrest Fenn down, folks. I'm trying to say, if you're a serious hunter out there looking for this, keep in mind the kind of mind you're dealing with, who is at the forefront of this entire chase. The person who dreamt it up. Likes to corrupt words to bring words to your attention. Likes to corrupt ideas to make you think twice about ideas. Is sarcastic sometimes when giving out hints and clues. Is kind of tricky with the way he says things and writes things. To keep you on your toes? I guess so. But at the same time, could it mislead you? How could it not mislead you? He says he's never intentionally tried to mislead anyone. Well, okay. Like I said, Forrest Fenn's not God, and I don't have him on any pedestal. So if some of you are out there kind of shocked, going, the more he says, the more he sounds like he's really talking bad things about Forrest Fenn. I'm telling you what Forrest Fenn himself has said, and Forrest Fenn, to me, can take it. Forrest Fenn's a tough guy. Look at his life. He's not a snowflake. Boy, if ever there was a poster man for the non-snowflake, the non-millennial wimp, hi, Belle. It's Forrest Fenn.